All right, Jord, thank you for your time, sir. Congratulations on 2,000 subscribers. I think you finally might be in favor of the algorithm and others are able to find your show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, V. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right, Jord, can you give a brief introduction about yourself and how you got started with Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. So small town guy from Canada. We've been going through some issues here in the last couple of years, as I'm sure most people are aware of. And so that was a big driving force for me. And in 2020, things just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So at this time, just to give a real quick story about how I got here. I went through the school system like most people do, the public school system. Went through college, university, took my CPA. It's essentially like your master's in accounting. I worked at a financial firm for close to 10 years. And during 2020, a lot of questions, not a whole lot of answers, some time on my hands to do a little bit of sniffing around. And there was some stuff going on at work, some political stuff between the pandemic and whatever else. And I was pretty alone. I was forced to work from home by myself, and kind of reflecting back on that time in history, it was pretty dark. And I went through some tough times, I guess you'd say. And during this, I was kind of being forced out of that, and at the same time, I was being drawn into Bitcoin. And so I made the very tough decision to just kind of leave it all behind and start something fresh. So at the time, I was kind of working through my own little business. We have a golf company called King Golf, KNG Golf. And so I was doing that at nights. I was doing that at mornings. I was pretty stressed out, doing work from home by myself. I loved the work that I was doing, but the thing that I really enjoyed about my job was the people there. And I was basically cut off of that. And so I just said, you know, I'm very fascinated by this Bitcoin thing. I didn't really know a whole lot back then, but I knew enough that there was something there. And I could just see things. I wasn't anywhere near where I am today in terms of understanding Bitcoin, but I just had this gut feeling that there was something there and I needed to look further into it. And not only did I think that it was going to possibly replace my job someday, but it was just so fascinating to me. And I never got to be part of the internet hype and the transition through the internet era. And so I was just excited for this. And I have been every day since. I haven't spent one day regretting the decision. And so that's what I do. I focus my time on the golf stuff, and I do a daily show on YouTube. It's called the Daily Bitcoin Journey. And it's just a bunch of people hanging out talking about Bitcoin. And it seems like a lot of people are really drawn to the show just because it's more logic, more common sense. There's not a whole lot of hype. And we were talking before the show here, and I said, we're going to have a good chat today because we're pretty much on the exact end of the spectrum here in terms of your very technical analysis stuff. I couldn't be further from that. I'm more big picture, macro kind of stuff, and just very excited to be in this space right now.
Great. So like you mentioned, you have a show. Why did you title it 88 Sats Radio for your YouTube channel?
So the 88 Sats radio channels actually stemmed from something else. It was kind of my introduction into the whole Bitcoin space officially. So I had this big vision, and once I understood the whole premise behind Bitcoin, the fixed supply of it, the long time preference, low time preference aspect of it, I had this vision that if I could find some people, we could all put in some Bitcoin, we put it into this shared wallet, and we wait 5 or 10 years. And at the end of it, hopefully we have enough purchasing power to purchase our own golf course. And so that was a concept there. And believe it or not, within 2 or 3 months, it was much shorter than I thought it was going to be. But within 2 or 3 months, we found 88 people. They all contributed a decent amount of Bitcoin. Let's say $200 or $300 worth of Bitcoin. We put it into the wallet, and we kind of started forming this community there. So everybody, of the 88, there was probably at least 80 people who had never heard of Bitcoin before, never owned Bitcoin. And I really wanted to make it about Bitcoin. And so I said, you can't just send in money. You actually have to learn how to buy Bitcoin. You have to do that and send the Bitcoin to this wallet. So we ended up filling all 88 shares. We launched it on January 3rd, 2022, I think. January 3rd, 2023. And so we're in it about a year now. They've seen their shares increase by about 200% since then. I think when we started buying it within that group, it was $15,000, about 15 to 18,000. And we know where it's at now. It's at about 70,000 today. So everybody's happy, but I said from the start, we're going to have some good runs. We're going to have some bad runs. But the point of this whole thing is that we're going to weather it all, and we're going to be here for at least 5 or 10 years. And we'll see what kind of golf course we end up with. I have no doubt that we're going to get a golf course one day.
I think you would get at least a little 9-holer.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people think that that's kind of the vision, is that we're just going to buy this little small town 9-hole course. But I'm thinking like Pebble Beach, something like that. I just know where this whole thing's going, and even if we have to wait a couple more years, I think that it'll pay off in the long run. So it's pretty fun, and that's what kind of inspired the channel. And from there, I did about a year of just posting every week, every couple weeks. I never got a whole lot of traction. And it wasn't until I started doing a daily show every morning. In the last 6 months, we went from about 150 subscribers to, as you said, over 2,000 subscribers now. So we're trending in the right direction. We're helping a lot of people, and it helps me get out of bed every day quite easily.
Yeah, I love the show. I listen to it almost every morning when I work out.
Awesome.
What does Bitcoin mean to you in a few words?
Honestly, Bitcoin's hope. And I know that that's a buzzword around the community here, but it is. Like I said, I was in a very dark place in 2020. I think a lot of people were. And Bitcoin was the light that led me to here. And it sounds cheesy, I'm sure, but it's true. I had a very dark image of the future between the surveillance state, between the CBDCs. I thought that was the only path that we were going towards until I discovered Bitcoin. And that's been the whole movement for me. Is just pushing things in that direction. And it's kind of unfortunate that people who aren't in Bitcoin think that Bitcoiners are just here to get rich quick. That's one part of it, but just to get rich. And I think if you actually zoom in and start looking at the Bitcoiners, and I get a real good sense from a lot of people that it's not about the money, it's about the freedom movement. And I really believe that Bitcoin is our last chance to escape that reality, the CBDC surveillance state. And so that's what keeps me going, is just that it is hope. It's finally a light at the end of the tunnel, that we've gone through a lot of years, a lot of decades, centuries of this same system, and it's enough of it. We need to start moving in a different direction. And I think that Bitcoin is the only way to do that.
So you probably agree with the saying, fix the money, fix the world.
I do. I absolutely believe that. And I think that, being here in Canada, you talk to people, you have dinner conversations, you have a couple of beers with people. Everybody's very concerned about what's going on here. And it's very easy to point to the government. It's easy to point at people, say, greedy CEOs. There's a bunch of different theories that people have about what's going on here. But at the end of the day, the core issue to every single problem is the money. It's fiat. And I talked about that on the show yesterday. I won't get too far into it today, but even things like mental health. I'm a golfer. There was a professional golfer over the weekend who took his own life. And, I'm just kind of one of the mindset that fiat creates all that. It creates we're in a society that's designed to just stomp you, keep you down and stomp you. And it's a problem right now. And so I do think that once you fix that core issue, people, whether they know that it's Bitcoin doing it or not, are going to see their lives slowly improve over time here. Whether they own Bitcoin, whether they get involved in the communities, they're going to see their life slowly over time here just continue to get better and better. So that's what I'm here for.
So what do you think is the biggest thing holding others back from adopting Bitcoin?
Just narratives. That's the unfortunate part. I think that the people who don't want Bitcoin to succeed know that they don't have any tools other than just to smear it. And for 15 years, we've been part of that marketing campaign, a very negative campaign against Bitcoin. And I fell for it for the first 11 years. I heard Bitcoin. I knew the people who were associated with Bitcoin. And I think that the people I knew didn't really understand it. And so my shows every day are an hour each or more, because I do think that it's not something that you can just learn in 10 minutes. You can't watch a 10-minute YouTube video and understand Bitcoin. You have to be you have to start at square one, which is the money. And then you have to have a very deep, thought out conversation with somebody before they actually understand it. Because whether they trust the news, whether they trust the government or not, they're still getting all this information subconsciously through that because they talk to their friends, they talk to their neighbors, their coworkers, and they might watch the news and they've heard these things about Bitcoin, whether it's through bad for the environment, used by drug dealers. Everybody knows the whole narrative about it. And so they're getting this information secondhand. And that's kind of the only thing that they have in their minds about it. They haven't taken more than 10 minutes to really understand it. And so that's the problem, is that there's just been too much negativity around it. And the other thing too, I think that people are finally ready for it. You have to have an open mind to be ready for Bitcoin. And we're kind of at the point now, I'm sure you can relate to this where you are, but here in Canada, people are at the point now where they have an open mind. If you talk to anybody here, including me, 5 years ago about Bitcoin being able to change the world, I would have laughed at you. I would have looked at you like you had three heads, because we hadn't lived through what we lived through in the last 5 years. And people are finally at the point now, they've been pushed far enough that they're ready to at least look into it. And so when people are ready for that, they have to have somebody there. And that's kind of the whole point of the channel. And the reason I'm doing what I'm doing is just to be there for people, because Bitcoin can be a very lonely place. I'm sure you've went through that before, but I have for sure. And you know, it's hard to find people in real life to talk to, very hard to find people in real life to talk to about Bitcoin. But even online, I think that just having a community there where you can share ideas, help each other out, and just prepare for all the attacks that are coming towards Bitcoiners. And when you can have people there, I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah, I like how you also mentioned that, you know, you can't really learn this in a few days or a few weeks. Like I started in 2018, and then I slowly got out of the market, came back in, you know, a few years ago. And I'm like, oh man, look at all these changes that happened, you know? So it just, every day something new comes out. And I like how your show, you talk about what's going on every day, you know, like the recent one you did a few weeks ago was like, you know, that guy getting booed at the stadium. And then, you know, like something about Trump. And then like, you know, there's always something going on in the Bitcoin space. So you got to stay up to date.
Always something going on. And it's funny because the reason I started my daily show is because during that month, I got about 3 or 4 calls from people who had lost money, either through some sort of crypto scam or they got hacked, whatever it is. And my whole idea behind the show is I was just going to hop on quickly for 10 or 15 minutes in the morning, share a few tips on security, things to watch out for. And I did it at 8 a.m. because I didn't think that anybody would show up for the show. I wanted to do them live, but I didn't think anybody would show up for the show. That's why I did it so early. And prior to that, I kind of got up right before 8. So I started getting up at 6. But it evolved. People started showing up. I could tell that people were really looking for something like this. And with the hour-long conversations, you can get into these different things. And I started with a page of ideas that I was going to talk about if I ran out. But we're going on more than 6 months now, every single day. And there's an hour of stuff to talk about between news and between things to watch out for, my opinion on things. But the main focus on the show is actually just like living in the future. And I know that you had Jeff Booth on the show recently, and his big thing is we don't have to wait for this whole thing to happen. If you start living in that future, your life changes. Everything about you changes. The way you earn money, the way you interact with people, how you save money, how you focus on different things. And so that's the whole concept of it, is just a very long-term view on it and hoping to change the narrative around Bitcoin in a positive way.
So where do you think Canada is headed in the next 10 years?
Well, this morning show, we actually had a very famous Bitcoiner from Canada, Francis Pouliot from Bull Bitcoin on. So they had a Canadian Bitcoin conference here over the weekend. And I'm very hopeful, honestly. I think that there's a lot of bad things happening in Canada. But at the same time, governments change, policies change, and there's a really good core group of Bitcoiners in Canada. And it's very exciting to me. I think that Canada is one of the countries that people sleep on in terms of the potential here. I know we're in a very dark spot right now, but I mean, once you get some adults in the room, once we move into this, as the fiat world continues to destroy itself, it's doing it by itself. And I mean, I'm sure you could guess my opinions on Trudeau, but at the same time, you know, he's helping. He's accelerating things here in Canada. He's pushing people towards Bitcoin. The more money that he prints and the more money that he sends to other countries, the more pissed off people become. And you know, the beauty of Bitcoin is that the harder you try to fight it, the more it pushes back. And you can do whatever you want to it, and you can print as much money. Everything is good for Bitcoin, including Justin Trudeau. So that's what I would say on that.
So do you think it first has to get a lot worse, like completely collapse before it can rebuild itself? Or you think you could turn around the situation as of right now?
It's going to get worse, I think. There's just no way around it. It's moving too fast, and there's not enough people who are doing anything about it. So we will go through some hard times, and that's what Francis's presentation was titled, actually, The Hard Path. I think that if you're in Bitcoin right now, or if you're even going down that road, it's a very hard place to be, because 95% of the time you're called a crazy person, you're laughed at, you're mocked. But for the 5% where, you know, Bitcoin's running up for those 2 weeks, you're a savior. And if it's a very tough position to be, because the majority of time you are the crazy person in your friend group, in your, you know, everybody that you know, you're the crazy Bitcoin guy. But then when it's running up and everybody wants to get a piece of it, they come to you. And so I think that it will get worse. It's going to get harder. But at the end of this, back in 1971, being in the States, you'd know what happened there. But it's the same kind of thing for me. People in 1971, they took the US off the gold standard. The majority of people had no idea what was going on there. They didn't know what it meant. My dad worked in the bank for 40 years, and he was almost oblivious to that whole thing. And so people didn't know what kind of impact that would have. 50 years later, we're seeing it really play out now. So I think that we're going to see the exact same thing with Bitcoin. A lot of people will never even know what's happening here in Bitcoin. They might never own a UTXO themselves, but they're slowly, it's shifting the other way now. It's shifting towards a much brighter future. People are just going to notice their lives slowly over time here, as this plays out, slowly get better without even really knowing why.
Yeah. I think one of the Bitcoin has like dozens of use cases, but what a very strong one is that you have the right to take your property wherever you want, right? A lot of people who had to flee their country in terms of turmoil, like Germany back in the early 1900s, or Zimbabwe or Venezuela, or you can name dozens and dozens of countries throughout history. People had to leave, their real estate at where they were. People had to leave their gold. You can only take so much gold with you, right?
Yes.
Your silver, even your cash, right? You only take so much cash with you. But the thing about Bitcoin now is that it allows you to be mobile, super mobile, So I think that's one of the things that we're going to probably see mass migrations, possibly the next coming decades. What do you think about that?
No, you're absolutely right. And that's something that in my life, I like talking about things that actually happen in my life and experiences. And it's much easier to talk about that because it happened. And I was having a conversation with a lady a couple weeks ago, and she has no idea what Bitcoin is. A lot of people I talk to think it's a physical coin that you hold. That's how far away we are from this whole adoption, but it's happening fast at the same time. But the point there is that I could tell that she was ready for it, ready to have the conversation, because she said that she's a person who keeps cash under the mattress. And as soon as she said that, I knew that she was worried about what could happen. And I said, think about this. I know this has never been a thing here in Canada before. We've never faced having to leave the country. But over the last couple of years, a lot of people have left Canada because it's gotten so bad here. But if you're in a position like that, you try to do something with that cash under your mattress. Try to take it to the bank. Try to take it on an airplane. And that could be cash, that could be gold, silver, like you said. One of the main selling points, I think, for a lot of countries and people within those countries is going to be the fact that you can put those 12 words in your head, hop on a plane, land, restore those 12 words into any Bitcoin wallet out there, and all of a sudden you took all of your wealth with you. Everything that you've worked for your entire life, you can now hop on an airplane, go to wherever you want to go, memorize 12 words, and you're good to go. And you could never do that with any other asset, ever. And back in the 30s, they took people's gold. And it's the same thing with Bitcoin. If you go to that extreme and you go through the steps in the process of memorizing 12 words, they could come to your house and there's absolutely nothing that they could do to get that Bitcoin from you if you do it right.
Yep. Okay, let's switch some gears here. So, like, how do you think AI will shape the world in the coming decades?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess to precede that, I'm definitely not an expert on AI. I like having fun with it where I can. The one thing for me that I'm excited about with AI is that I know that AIs are going to accept Bitcoin. Because if you think about it, there's 167 different currencies around the world. And these AIs, they're not going to have time. They're not going to be able to convert your Canadian dollars or ask, you to convert it into Zimbabwe dollars or whatever it is. It's just not going to happen. They're going to accept Bitcoin. And so, you see all these different things. You see public companies, you see countries, and now AI, who's going to replace a lot of different jobs as we go forward here. They're going to be wanting Bitcoin. And a big thing for me, and a part of the whole living in the future thing, is that if you are in Bitcoin now and you have some conviction to hold on through anything, because just to take a side trail here, with the ETFs, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but with the ETFs, I think that it's going to be very tempting for a lot of people to sell their Bitcoin. A lot of people who don't really understand Bitcoin, when they see it go from 70,000 to 500,000 to $1 million, they're going to be very tempted to sell it. And that's exactly what Wall Street wants people to do. But if you can get through that, if you can weather that and have enough conviction to hold on to Bitcoin through that, you're going to have so much leverage in the future for your business, being able to utilize tools like AI to make your life much easier. And think about, if you have Bitcoin now, how much less you're going to be able to pay for those kind of things. So you're going to have leverage in terms of your purchasing power, in terms of your hiring people. Everybody's going to want to work for Bitcoin. You're going to have that. And you're going to be able to pay AI in Bitcoin for things you don't want to do. So to me, it's just it's a no-brainer. If nothing else, you should just be getting some Bitcoin just to prepare for the future, because it's the world that we're moving into. And I think that if you can't see that, you just need to spend some more time in it.
Yeah, like Jeff Booth says, right? The natural state of a free market is deflation.
Yes.
So what that means is that, as technology progresses, things get cheaper over time. So in my experience, I actually started using Chat GPT to generate my thumbnails. And to generate the thumbnails, you just have to write a sentence instead of paying someone maybe $5 or $10 per thumbnail. So I can generate thousands of images for probably $20 a month versus paying someone, $100 or $200. And it's not perfect, right? It has misspelling and it doesn't do exactly how I want it, but it's pretty close, and it only gets better, right, as time goes on.
Yeah, 100%. And just kind of going along those lines, I think that with the AI stuff, I think that a lot of people's it's going to change. It's going to get rid of a lot of jobs, and people have different opinions on that. I think that it's a good thing. I mean, if you're somebody who stands and rings in groceries for 8 or 9 hours a day, I just think that there's more to life than that. And if we can find machines to replace that, then I think we're going to be moving into a better world. Even though it's going to be painful for a while, there are going to be people who their whole industry is going to be shooken up by AI. It already is. It's replacing X amount of jobs every month, but it's going to be the people who embrace it, whether it's a graphic designer, whether it's a photographer, whether it's a law firm. It's the people who embrace it. They're actually going to, and if they choose to save some of their reserves in Bitcoin and fund that AI with Bitcoin, they're going to have so much leverage in the future. So it's the ones that embrace it instead of trying to fight it and go around it. It's going to be the ones who embrace it. Eventually it might replace them too, but I think that'll probably be, hopefully, out of our lifetime.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, like you touched upon Bitcoin ETFs. Do you think it's good or bad for Bitcoin? What are your thoughts on the Bitcoin ETFs?
Everything's good for Bitcoin. And the ETFs no different. I have some negative thoughts on it for sure. I'm worried that over time their goal here, because you have to think about it like this. With the ETFs, the BlackRocks, the Fidelities, they don't really care what the price is. If it's $2 million, they're still going to be buying Bitcoin. I think that they're manipulating it in a way to keep it down right now, just to keep people's eyes off of it for now, just so they can accumulate as much as they can. Because the thing with Bitcoin and why it's so unlike any other asset is that it's fixed. And so with stocks, with gold, with anything else, if supply is high enough, or if demand's high enough, you can just get more supply. You can issue more shares, you can mine more gold, With Bitcoin, you can't do that. And they know that. And so if the price ran up to $200,000 tomorrow, everybody would be wanting to get Bitcoin. And that would take away from their ability to accumulate more Bitcoin at this stage of the game. And so what's going to happen here is, I think that once they get to a level, they're going to send it to the moon. They will. If you understand basic economics of supply and demand, there's going to come a pinch point here where the price just goes through the roof, and they're going to be happy about that, because their whole fund structure, the way that they make money, is based on the value of their funds. And so if they have 3% of Bitcoin that's worth $100 billion today, and all of a sudden that's worth $2 trillion in a month from now, think about the 1% of fees they're taking off of that. This is a huge opportunity for them, and they don't care what the price is going to be. And so with the ETFs, I think the one thing I'm worried about is people are going to fall for that, and they're going to see the price running up in fiat, and everything at that point is going to cost so much, and they're just going to sell it. And BlackRock's going to end up with it. And then, we could go down a path eventually. I don't think we're going to get there ever, but we could go down a path where the ETFs, everything's tokenized, and they issue their currencies based on the ETFs, and they have full control of everything. And that's just not what Bitcoin was designed to be. So I think it was inevitable. I think that, we don't get to decide who gets to own Bitcoin and who doesn't. That's the beauty of Bitcoin, is that it's for everybody. So there's good. I mean, without the ETFs, none of this capital would have ever flowed into Bitcoin. Because if you think about the process of, let's say that Apple wanted to own some Bitcoin and hold some Bitcoin themselves. It's a very long process in terms of finding people who know about Bitcoin, training them on Bitcoin, setting up a whole team to manage that Bitcoin, who gets the keys. Like, that could be a couple years in the making, trying to figure out how to store Bitcoin, because it's just not something that we know right now. And if you think about every company like that, with the ETF, they don't have to worry about any of that. Coinbase does that all for them, which I don't love, but it brings all this money into Bitcoin. And if you're somebody who believes that, everybody's going to have some Bitcoin one day, it had to happen.
Yeah. So what do you think about the Ethereum ETF? I think they approved it just to probably slow Bitcoin down, right? Because I heard Ethereum is a security, and something like they're not supposed to approve ETFs for securities. So I think they're just trying to slow Bitcoin down at this point, just prove everything, to get people's eyes off of it. Or, what do you think about that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's part of their strategy there. I think Jack Mallers was on one of the mainstream news things the other day, and he said the reason they're going to approve this ETF is because they see what's happening with Bitcoin. None of their other investments are making any money right now. There's like 7 stocks in the world who are doing well, but outside of that, it's a crapshoot. And so they saw how well the Bitcoin ETF did. They're hoping to replicate that with the Ethereum ETF. I think it's going to be an absolute disaster, for one, because if you think about the difference between a commodity and a security, Ethereum is definitely a security. And I think that if you're in denial of that, you have to look a little bit further into this. So to me, it's kind of a mystery of why. I understand they want to make money off it, and they will make money off it. But with Bitcoin, if you think back to when Satoshi introduced Bitcoin, and the first Bitcoin that was mined back in 2009, none of it was there was no owner, there was no board of directors, Satoshi didn't send 500 Bitcoin to Hal Finney as a thank you for helping. Ever since the very first block was mined in Bitcoin, every single Bitcoin has been either earned or bought. That's it. And so with the Ethereum is different, because they had the ICO, they launched it, they sent some to the Ethereum Foundation, they sent some to Vitalik, they sent some. That's a security. They didn't do anything to earn that. They just sent it to them. And when they switched to proof of stake from proof of work, that's when I sold my Ethereum, because it's just like, it doesn't make any sort of sense to me. And I've been talking fairly negatively about Ethereum on my channel lately. And on the weekend, I had a couple roundabout attacks, I guess you'd say. Lots of comments, which helped the channel, I guess, grow. But at the same time, somebody signed me up for hundreds or thousands they must have found a way to automate. They sent my email address into these subscriptions.
I saw that.
So, yeah. On Saturday night, I looked at my email, and there's like 1,000 just random emails in there. It was a pretty smart tactic, honestly, but very annoying. But that's the kind of things that we're dealing with. Like it's just two different communities. It's two different mindsets. Just nothing about Ethereum gives me any sort of like good feelings about anything. So I probably talk a little bit more than I should about it, but at the same time, it's important for people to know that, because I think that even on my channel, there's a lot of people who own Ethereum just because it costs less than Bitcoin. And that's kind of their mental model on it, is they can get more of it. So they're just going to throw some money into that when they have no idea what it does, no idea the long-term consequences of a security versus a commodity. And so I just feel the need to actually explain it to people. And a lot of that Ethereum has been converted into Bitcoin. And I think that, you know, in 5 or 10 years from now, they might send me an email saying, thanks for being so hard on Ethereum.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people, they look at Bitcoin as a company, which they shouldn't, right? If you look at it as a company, you're like, oh, well, that company looks like they can do faster transactions, or that company has more security or whatever, right? So if you look at it as a company, then it would make sense why, you know, these altcoins are, you know, better in some ways, and you don't want Bitcoin. But if you look at Bitcoin as a commodity, no counterparty risk, a protocol, you're like, okay, well, all those things came because of Bitcoin. You know, if Bitcoin didn't exist, those would not exist. And then I think a lot of these alts exist just mostly because of trading, right? So traders, they have a watch list of stuff they want to trade, right? They don't normally just trade one market. They usually have like maybe 20 or 30, you know, cryptos on a watch list. And they're like, okay, I'm going to choose this one today because it's moving better, or this one has a better setup. So they need all these like options, right? Or liquidity to trade. So a lot of these altcoins, they just exist for trading purposes mostly. And then a lot of them, you know, over the years, they just drop off the list. You know, I remember like EOS was like top 10 or something like that, right? And now it's like 50th, or like some cryptos maybe a few years ago were like top 10, top 20, and they just drop off. You know, traders just, they get bored of it, liquidity dries up, and then, you know, it just disappears. But Bitcoin has stood the test of time.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. I think that a lot of people, and I get that. I have no issues with people owning cryptos because they want to trade them. I don't recommend it. I would never spend that much time doing that. But there is money to be made. And I think that if that's what you're into it for, then I totally get that. And I do think that, you know, I'm not a Bitcoin maxi by any means. I do have some altcoins that I got back in 2020 before I got into Bitcoin. But for the last 2 or 3 years, the only thing I've been buying and paying attention to is Bitcoin. And kind of the one thing I would say on that, just to kind of round the conversation up about the altcoins, is that I know that there are a lot of people out there who are kind of waiting for, let's say they bought it back in 2020, they bought Shiba Inu for, you know, 0.0000 whatever. And they're still kind of waiting for it to get up to where it was, where they bought it, so they don't lose any money. But they're looking at it the wrong way. They're looking at it in terms of fiat. And so their plan, I think, there for a lot of people is to wait until they get back to even and then flip it into Bitcoin. But they have to understand that when you go to trade that back into Bitcoin, you're going to be getting much less Bitcoin than you would if you sold it today. Because if your coin's running up, that means that Bitcoin has already run up. And so that's what I would say is, if you are somebody who's waiting for it to get back up to your fiat price, don't, because you're just going to get less Bitcoin if you trade it today. If you look at everything, every asset on earth is just going to keep going down in comparison to Bitcoin. So there's really nothing to wait for. If you believe in Bitcoin and you want to hold some Bitcoin, swap everything you have for Bitcoin today.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of truth to that. A lot of people think, oh, you know, we can have an altcoin season or altcoin rally. Well, a lot of times that doesn't happen for every one of them, right?
Yep.
A lot of them, you know, markets, you know, they trend up, they trend down, and they trend sideways. So you might be stuck in something for, you know, a few years while Bitcoin has appreciated in value, which I think 99.9% of people think it will, you know, and it has a chance to. And versus your thing, it's just flatlining. You know, whenever I look at a chart and a bubble pops, what happens after it comes right back to the starting point, and then it flatlines. You know how like someone's on an operating table and the heartbeat just dropped off, it just flatlines.
Yep.
So all the liquidity just disappeared, right? Because it was a pump and dump. And then now it's just doing nothing. So a lot of these altcoins, they're going to probably stay like that. You know, people don't understand that.
Yeah, and that's part of being a security, is that a lot of these exchanges have been basically facilitating the trade of unregulated securities, and that's a problem. And so if the SEC does ever decide to crack down on this, which they will, they're going to have a lot of problems, because when the exchanges go down, and as you said, as the liquidity dries up, when exchanges go down, you're not able to move it back and forth like you could before. There's not as many people who are willing to buy it before. The liquidity dries up, and all of a sudden your coin goes from maybe worth $1 to nothing, because there's no ability to trade it. There's no liquidity there anymore. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin, is that it's a global asset with global demand. And I compare it to land all the time here, because it's, to me, it's a better version of land for the banks, for liquidity. And a very underrated aspect of Bitcoin is its ability to the liquidity within Bitcoin. You know, if you want to go to the bank, the one thing I say to people is just keep 90% of your Bitcoin forever, almost as if you're like a farmer with land. Farmers have used this model forever. Land and Bitcoin are the only two real fixed assets on earth. And so when farmers want to go to the to get a new truck, they don't sell a small chunk of their land. They take out a loan against it. And that's what I think that people should be doing, and how they should be thinking about Bitcoin, is that they're not going to sell some of their Bitcoin for a new truck. They're going to go to the bank and say, look, this is how much Bitcoin I have. Give me some fiat for it. Go buy that. And, you know, a 5% or 6% interest rate compared to a 150% increase in Bitcoin purchasing power every year, it's a no-brainer. So I just think that a lot of people within Bitcoin have learned their lessons, but there's more lessons to be learned as we go forward here.
All right. Okay, let's get a little bit into golf now. So I like the niche you have about Bitcoin and golf. You hold sats as, you know, prizes awarded to those who pick like a winning player in a tournament, or like top 5, you know, for like the Masters you did recently or something like that. You recently had custom-made Bitcoin golf tees as well. So can you explain the idea behind this and the direction you are taking the channel? Because a lot of golfers are generally, you know, on the wealthier side, so they might be more like keen to invest in something like Bitcoin. So, you know, have you like seen any players you met, you know, on the rounds, or like, you know, talking, you know, during the tee box, you know, like, hey, Bitcoin this, Bitcoin that, you know?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that kind of the whole reason there, and I think that you could just, you're using golf as an example here, but I think you could do this with anything. And this is something I would encourage anybody listening to this show, is just think of what your interests are and start building a community, because there's enough Bitcoin only things going on right now. And, you know, as Bitcoin continues to grow and evolve, it'd be like going to an internet conference now. Like, it just won't exist really in 10 or 15 years from now. Bitcoin conferences won't. But the best way to like find new people and get more people into Bitcoin and grow your network is to find similar interests. The beauty of Bitcoin is that when you meet a Bitcoiner, you know that you have that in common. That's number one. But then from there, you can kind of talk about other interests, and you can find different interest groups within that. So the big thing for me, honestly, and I'm not sure if we're going to talk about this or not today, but is Noster. And, you know, the golf thing has really tied into Bitcoin for that. I wouldn't say that I'm the golf guy on Noster, but I think that Noster has so much opportunity right now. If you follow Gary Vee at all, I don't love the stuff that he's done with Ethereum and that kind of stuff, but he has some really good business advice, and it's find the most undervalued, underpriced attention. And I think that Noster is that right now. So if you're a Bitcoiner, if you have a business, whatever it is, you need to be on Noster, and you need to be talking and interacting with other Bitcoiners. Because if you really want to move out of this fiat system, it's not something that happens overnight or over a year, but slowly you just start, as Jeff Booth says, you start taking your time and your energy slowly every single day and moving it into the new system. And the bigger you can grow your network and your community within Bitcoin, if you can start buying your meat, your eggs, your golf products with Bitcoin, the more things you can buy Bitcoin with, the less reliance you have on the fiat system. And so golf for me is just something that I love. I've always loved. I've very easy to talk about. And so I've met a lot of really good people within the Bitcoin community because they're golfers. We have Bitcoin in common, and then we have golf. So think about whatever you're interested in, just get onto Noster and start posting about it, pictures, your expertise, maybe you get some zaps back in return. But at the end of the day, the focus is on just growing your network. And the stronger your Bitcoin network, the less reliance you have on the fiat system. And at the end of the day, that's kind of my whole goal here.
Yeah. So can you touch upon, you know, like what Noster is? Like, how do you help others start living in the future with Bitcoin?
I mean, it's just, as I said, taking your time and taking your energy. I think that people really sleep on how much of an impact they can have just by doing things differently and choosing the freedom options. And so every day on the live show, I do it on YouTube because that's where I think that a lot of new Bitcoiners hang out. But I also do it on Zap.stream, which is kind of a new platform within the Bitcoin community. Exact same as YouTube. There's a live chat, but people can actually send Bitcoin in real time on there. And so just using different things like that is very important. And we've never really had the ability before in the 30 years of the internet. We've never had the ability to send 1 cent of value, 2 cents of value, because the legacy system that we use just didn't facilitate that. And so now we do have Zap.streams, we do have Fountain, we have all these different freedom tools, Noster being built on there. And I just think it's so important that we put our time and our energy into those. And at the same time, it's underpriced, it's undervalued. There's more, if you compare it to TikTok, right? If you were on TikTok early, there was a lot more consumers than creators, right? And so the creators, the people were watching on TikTok got really big because there was a huge disconnect there between consumers, people watching the content, and creators, the people who are creating the content. And I think the Noster is the same kind of thing right now. There's a lot more people who are just sniffing around on there and a lot less creators on there. So, I mean, with Noster, the beauty of it is, you know, you compare it to TikTok again, you like a video on there, what's a like, right? I get that people are trying to build up their brand, their audience, but if you compare a like to a Zap, like if I like one of your posts on Noster, I don't have to like it. I can send you value for it. I can send you 100 sats, 1,000 sats, whatever I feel like it was worth. And it's the only platform, I don't know if it's called a platform. It's a protocol. It's like the internet, like Bitcoin. Noster is a protocol. And there's a ton of different things being built on Noster right now. But it facilitates that. You can send value to somebody. If you get value from something, you know, and the funny thing is I actually use Noster more than I use Google now. If you've used Google in the last year, like it's not very useful anymore. It's all ads. It's all everything that Google wants you to see. And to find actual information that you want, you have to scroll down to like page 5 to find it. And so I just go on Noster, you make a post saying, what did I ask the other day? Anyways, you ask a question on there and there's like 5, 10, 15 people who are willing to answer the question for you. Another real human being who has shared that experience before. And so if somebody helps you, you can send them sats. You can zap them for it, 100 sats, 1,000 sats, whatever it is. But that's the kind of information I think as we move into this decentralized world, I just find that's to be so much valuable to being able to connect with somebody else versus the Google algorithm, what they want you to see. So Noster, I think it's very early. The things that are being built on there are just incredible. And that's one thing I wish that people who weren't in Bitcoin or as much into Bitcoin as I am could see, just the things that are being built on Bitcoin, on Noster. And, you know, you think about all the capital that's leaving the old system, all of the intellectual property, the brains are all leaving that old system too. And everybody's working on Bitcoin right now. And so when the masses are ready to come, things are going to be ready for them, including Noster. So I don't know if I did a very good job explaining it there. I mean, the last thing I would say on that is that it's very censorship resistant. So, I mean, we talked about the zaps, how you can send value to other people. But the beauty of Noster is that if you create an account on there, like a public private key pair, and there's an application called Damus. So you just go to the App Store, you download Damus, they set you up with a private public key. It's similar to like a username and password. But you can use it on Damus. And let's say you posted something that the owner of Damus didn't agree with, and he banned you from Damus. That's a problem. And that's a problem we've lived through in the last 5 years is lots of censorship. But with Noster, you can actually take that same public key and private key and just go into a different application on Noster. So you go onto Primal. And the beauty of that is you're going to see all of your followers on there. All of your feed is going to look the exact same thing. So they can't kick you off of there. You can just find a different client. And I think that, you know, as we move into this world of suppression, censorship, this is going to be a big deal for a lot of people. And more every day, people are realizing the implications of censorship. So Noster finds a way to really go around that whole thing. And it's incredible.
Well said. I remember a video you did where you said you sold your real estate to buy Bitcoin. You bought near the top and held on. How did you have such a strong conviction for that? And then can you explain which is a better investment in your opinion?
Yeah. So I lived in a city for 10 years. That's when I was working through my CPA and working at a firm there. And so I was in the fiat world. I was making good money. I had some spare cash. I decided to buy a rental home. And I do think that real estate has a time and place. I just think that, you know, if you really understand Bitcoin, you understand that everything, if you look at the housing prices, even though, you know, your house might have went from $250,000 from 5 years ago to $500,000 today, if you look at how much it's gone down the opposite way in Bitcoin, I think that's a real eye opener for a lot of people. And it's a very visual thing for people to understand. So your house went from 250 to 500,000 in fiat, but at the same time, it went from 1,000 Bitcoin to 20 Bitcoin in the same time. So everything, including real estate, which is arguably the most scarce asset aside from Bitcoin, will continue to go down over time. And I didn't even really understand that at the time when I sold my rental home. But I just knew that, you know, there was this thing that made a lot of sense to me. I wanted to get as much of it as I possibly could. And the rental home was just a big pain in the ass for me. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, if you look at the costs of a rental house now, I don't know how people are doing it anymore. The costs of electricity, the cost of property taxes, the cost of insurance, interest rates have gone up. And so when you have a rental home, you look at your income and your expenses every month. And the expenses have gone up so significantly, and you don't have the same ability to increase your revenue by the same amount because of rent controls. And so I just think that it's a losing game, and more people are starting to figure out that, you know, keep your house. Don't sell your house for Bitcoin. You have to live somewhere. You can't live in a Bitcoin. But in terms of like a much better, easier, I don't know if this is the right word, but because it takes a lot to understand Bitcoin, to secure it, to have much conviction over it, but it's just less stress. You know, you hold on to it, you secure it, and you don't really have to think about it anymore. You're not getting calls from your tenants at midnight on New Year's saying that their sewer backed up from Bitcoin. So to me, it's a no-brainer now. At the time, it was much more of a risk because I didn't really understand what was happening there. But to me, if I had any sort of real estate right now, I would, without a doubt, sell it for Bitcoin, because it just doesn't make any sense to me that people would rather hold that than Bitcoin.
Yeah, just to like add on that, like you mentioned, rent controls, right? In the Western world, it had very strong property rights. You know, like, oh, you're the landlord. If no one's paying, you could kick them out, right? You know, because it's your property, right? You could choose who gets to stay there, and if they're not paying, then they can leave, right? So now it's kind of twisted. It's kind of reversed, where like a lot of the laws are just protecting the renter and even squatters at this point. You know, so like you're holding this thing where they can just take it away from you. You know, wherever you're, what state you're in, what country you're in, what renter you have. There's a lot of liability, you know, tied to real estate now versus, you know, just a few decades ago.
100%. Like when you say that out loud, when you hear these things, when you hear people talk about that, like even you saying that, like it's just so completely backwards. It's so completely backwards. And I think that's a really good reflection of our whole society right now. And, you know, I talked about Bitcoin being hope. As this whole thing moves forward, what's going to happen is everything from fiat is going to continue to go down and Bitcoin's continue to go up. And everything is just going to flip on its head. Everything that doesn't make sense right now is going to be fixed by this. You know, with Bitcoin, I think a lot of people hear the word and they immediately get turned off. But if they actually understood what's happening and how it connects the digital world where we all live in now and the physical world through the proof of work protocol, and how having a fixed asset, how much that changes things. When you take away the government's ability to print money and to send money to wherever they want and have zero accountability for anything, Bitcoin flips that whole system on its head. And I think that you asked me why I think people are taking such a long time to understand this. I think that's why. It's because it's so different than the system that we have right now. It literally takes everything, including that nonsense of rent controls, and just flips it on its head. So I agree. It just doesn't make any sense that you would continue spending your time, energy, and investments in your capital in a system that's sinking.
Yeah, I think a lot of people got to probably do like the Michael Saylor approach, where like he has like, this cash, and he goes through like all the ways he can convert it to something, right? Like gold, Bitcoin, bonds, stocks, whatever. And once you understand the problem, then you can understand the solution. Like, Bitcoin's the solution, but if you just start from there, you're like, okay, whatever, you don't appreciate it.
Yes.
But if you understand the problem, you're like, okay, well, how can I solve this problem? And then you go through the solutions, and then you find out that Bitcoin is the top, solution, or the apex predator.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that, just going along those lines of the crazy world that we live in right now, when you have inputs that are crazy, that's the outputs that you get. And we're living in a world right now, and we have been for a very long time now, that just doesn't make sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because we don't have a fixed asset to peg things to. So if you think about the fiat dollar, we don't know how many fiat dollars are out there. We have no idea how many US dollars are in circulation right now. Zero. We have a pretty good estimate, maybe, but how many have been destroyed? How many have been printed without us knowing about it? How many exist? So not only is it's completely unknown, but it's unlimited. If they decide that they want to print $2 trillion and send it to Ukraine tomorrow, we're not voting on that. It's making us poorer, but we're not voting on it. So when that system is it, if that's the system that you're measuring everything against, nothing makes sense, because we don't know what we're comparing it to. With Bitcoin, we know how much exists today. We know how much is going to exist in 10 years from now. And so when you have a unit of measurement like that, like Bitcoin is, you can accurately measure the value in the world.
Well said. Well said. Okay, Jord, with respect to your time, I have one last question before we wrap it up. You mentioned Earl Nightingale in a few videos. Earl is one of my mentors. What saying or idea has resonated the best to you from his teachings?
Oh, that's a great question, man. I appreciate you bringing Earl up. I recently discovered Earl, honestly. I think that if anybody listening to this has some time and you really want to me, Earl just represents proof of work in a lot of ways. I think that we live in a society right now that everybody wants the quickest, fastest life hacks to do nothing and change their life. Earl's the exact opposite of that. He understands that everything takes time, everything takes work and effort. And I think that if you live by those principles, your whole life is going to change. And I think that the one thing that's really stood out from Earl that I've learned is the power of your thoughts and the power of your words. If you want anything in life, the best thing that you can do is think about it every single morning. Write it down, make it real, look at it every single morning, every night before you go to bed. Think about that, because then you have a guiding force in your life. Every decision you make, whether you know it or not throughout the day, you're going to have that in the back of your mind where you're going to. You have some sort of direction there. And that's what he defines success is just having some sort of goal and some sort of direction there to go towards. And so just take some time, think about it. It can evolve. I mean, if you write down that you want to get your goal is to own 1 Bitcoin, and in a month from now, you decide that maybe you want something different than that, it can evolve. But for that month, at least you had some sort of direction that you're working towards there. And, even though you don't know exactly how you're going to get there, just by thinking about it every single day, you're going to find ways, whether you know it or not, throughout the day. Every decision you make is going to add up to going towards that goal. So I appreciate you bringing up Earl. That's awesome. I'm glad you like him too.
I love her. Yeah, I love her.
Kind of that's just kind of the wisdom that I think a lot of people sleep on. You hear all these old expressions that people say, and there's so much truth to them. And then you hear a guy, he's from like what, the 1930s?
Yeah, I think he was born like during the Depression.
Yeah, and I mean, the things that he says and talks about are still so incredibly relevant 100 years later. And so that's the advice that you want to follow. And with Bitcoin, you talk about the proof of work, you talk about the long-term view of everything. It's something that we need to get back to. Bitcoiners talk about the architecture and how crappy it's become in the last 100 years because everybody's so focused on getting stuff done fast. because the power of our money deteriorates by the day. And so if you have wisdom, if you have architecture, if you have your direction and a very long-term goal, it changes everything about you.
Yeah. Earl has, 6 famous words. We become what we think about. His
Exactly.
strangest secret. So everyone should listen to that 30-minute video on the strangest secret. It'll change your life.
It will. I really believe in that. And I've experienced it myself in a few different ways. And every morning I talk, or I literally say out loud the things that I want to happen in my life. And, although I haven't hit them yet, I'm working towards it.
All right, Jord, thank you very much for your time and education. Where can people connect with you or, get a hold of you for like the services you offer?
I'd say the best thing to do is just search 88 Sats radio channel on YouTube. Stop by there one morning. We do the show every morning at 10 a.m. Eastern time. No, sorry, 9 a.m. Eastern time. You got me all screwed up with these PSTs and ESTs. 9 a.m. Eastern time, 8 o'clock my time. And we talk for about an hour, just about Bitcoin, things going on, different ideas, living in the future stuff. And then from there, you'll probably hear different things I got going on within the description, my website, bitcoinjourney.ca. But that's it. I would just encourage anybody who's interested in learning more about Bitcoin, not so much the price action, not so much the charts. I know you focus on that kind of stuff. Mine's a much different approach to it. And I know that you can attest to that. It's a different way. And I don't think there's a whole lot of people talking about that on YouTube. So definitely join us in there. And it's a live show. We have a live chat. We take questions from the audience. It's a very unique show. So just consider that sometime.
All right, Jord. See you, man. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, V. I very much appreciate you having on. And it was great to meet you.